So we're on 19.1 here, for those of you watching at home.
Sorry
and we're talking about classification. So the first person to ever attempt to classify things was named Aristotle. Have you ever heard of him?
A Greek guy.
He was a Greek philosopher and thinker and scientist who decided he would classify things. And what he tried to do was he had plants in one group and animals in another group, and he classified the animals based on three factors: animals that lived in the water, animals that lived on land, and animals that could fly. So by his classification, mosquitoes and birds would be in the same classification because they both flew. And by his classification, dolphins and fish would be in the same category because they both swim. What's that?
Yeah, I didn't want to agree on water.
Yeah, water, land, and air. That was his classification scheme. And that was pretty good. And he was the first one that ever had attempted anything like this. So his groups worked pretty well, but there are some problems with it. Insects are very different than birds. And birds have bones and insects don't. The wings look different. Birds have feathers and insects don't. So there's some big differences between insects and birds, which is why we've eventually, scientists had to drop his classification scheme. This is a stupid video about his classification scheme.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's 3:45 BC and time to play Classify This with your host and philosopher, Aristotle.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Don. All right, as you all know, according to my foolproof system, every animal belongs in one and only one of these three groups: those that live on the land, those that live in the water, and those that fly. All right, are you ready, contestants? Good. What I'm going to do here is show you a picture of an animal, and I want you to classify it depending on where it lives: land, water, or air. Okay, let's play Classify This. Here's our first animal, the frog.
Land! Wait, he said
Okay, as we all know, of course, frog lives on the land.
Absolutely.
Yeah, basically. No, actually, sometimes it does live in the water, doesn't it? Although I'm sure it's way more time on the water. Let's move on to our next animal, shall we?
Yay!
Was that an insult to your intelligence? Sorry. So, that was the first scheme, and it didn't really work very well. But a more scientific classification came from a guy named Carolus Linnaeus. That's a picture of him. Carolus Linnaeus is known as the father of taxonomy. And taxonomy is the science that deals with classifying. We use the word taxon to mean a group. And what Linnaeus would do would be he would take two words and use them to classify any organism into what he called a genus and a specific epithet. For instance, humans are Homo sapiens.
Sapiens.
This is from Linnaeus' original system. The first word we call the genus. The genus is the group. to which you fit. And Homo is a genus of mammals that have hair. All mammals have hair. That are upright walking with big brains and opposable thumbs and eyes facing forward. And so there's a lot of characteristics you need to be in Homo, but the major one is very big brain. Homo have extremely large brain. And so that's the genus. That's the genus that we belong to, Homo. Sapiens is a certain species of Homo. But actually, when you see some people would say sapiens is the species, but it's not really. It's known as the specific epithet. Specific epithet. Epithet means description or name. The specific name of the genus Homo that pertains to us, that have the biggest brains of all, and relatively no hair, or relatively little hair, and upright walking. Still, of the genus Homo, we are the sapiens. Sapiens means wise. We are the smartest of all the Homo. There are other Homo that have gone extinct, but used to exist on Earth. You may have heard of some of them. Homo erectus, Homo habilis. You ever heard of these things before?
Yeah.
We're going to study them after the AP exam. So there's a whole range of Homo that are not sapiens, but sapiens is us. So the genus and specific epithet together, whoops, made that wrong. Together are called the species. The species is two words. It's always Latin. We use Latin because Latin is the root of many of the languages that we have nowadays. So we don't say everything in English. We can't call it wise human or something like that, because that's English, and that's not, those words wise and human are not French words or Spanish words, and so someone in France and in Spain would be at a disadvantage if we named everything in English. That would be fair only to us. So what's fair to everybody? Use Latin. English and French and Spanish all came from Latin. You see, it's the root language. I don't know if you know about how languages, but languages evolve just like life evolves. Languages changed over time. There used to be this one language, Latin, and then it kind of, over here, it changed into Spanish. And over here, it changed into English. And over here, it changed into French. Languages change over time. Did you know that? It's kind of cool. It's the same thing in America. People up north, they talk differently than people down south. We talk like this, guys. Honey boo-boo, don't do that. And that's a different sound than you get up north, where they talk like this. And so you get changes in languages. And maybe if we fast forward another 10,000 years, maybe South you wouldn't even be able to understand what they're saying in the South if you're a Northerner. It's probably true. You can hardly understand it now. So when you hear people speak. So languages change slowly over time, just like life does. And so we take the root language, Latin, and we name everything that. Yes?
Are the binomial nomenclature and the genus the same thing?
No, binomial nomenclature is kind of a term that means using two names for every species. So every species gets two names, a genus and a specific epithet. And when it's written, it's usually written in italics. You'll see it written in italics in the book.
For
instance, this type of lily is called Lilium canadense.
Canadian.
And this type of lily over here is called Lilium bubiferum. They're two different species. And so they have different names.
Why are they not specific epithets?
The specific epithet is the second name in the species.
Oh.
So the genus is the first name, the specific epithet is the second name.
And that can be almost...
The genus is a larger group than the species. The species is one specific group, and the genus is a larger... A genus can have several different species. You have to use both words, though, when you're talking about a species. You use the genus and the specific epithet. Yes?
Now, the specific epithet, isn't that kind of like just a unique name? That
The unique name, yes. The specific epithet is the unique name. But it has to go with the genus. The specific epithet by itself, if you just say sapiens, that does no good. Because there might be some other animal that's also called sapiens. There might be an insect called Tarugula sapiens. And it's some kind of spider somewhere. And it's totally different than Homo sapiens. So you can't just say sapiens. You can't just say the specific epithet. You got to say both names together. It's kind of like an address for your house. You know, I live at 257 Menendez is my address. Please don't come over. Anyway, I can't just say 257. Come to 257. That's meaningless. There's a lot of 257s here on the island. You got to say Menendez with it. Now you have the specific location of my house.
my parents' mail finds this way.
There's guards and gates and things. Y'all wouldn't be able to get in. It's pretty well protected. Got that kind of cat. Anyway, this is Linnaeus' book that he wrote. It was called Systema Naturae, and in that book he wrote about how his classification scheme works. And we take this classification scheme nowadays to an even higher level than Linnaeus did. We don't just use genus and species names for organisms. We classify them according to what we call nested levels that they show here. And the levels from large to small go like this. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order,
genus,
family, and then genus and specific epithet.
We memorized this for the exam.
What on there?
No.
Sorry.
King Philip came over from Germany sober.
Did King Philip come over from Germany sober?
Kings play cards on fat guys' stomachs.
Kings play cards on fat guys' stomachs?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
Lose off domain, but that's
Kings play cards on fat guys' stomachs?
Dumb kings play cards?
Dumb kings?
Okay.
What is this order?
Probably so.
What is this called?
This is the level. This is the hierarchy of classification, is what we call it. And it still uses the genus and specific epithet for the species. So this is still the species, these two. But the rest of the levels, as we go up, puts the classification in more and more general terms. And so, and when I was your age, they didn't have domain. Domain has come about more recently. Since they've been able to analyze things using DNA evidence, they've found that basically life exists in three main groups, which they call three domains. We use the three-domain system now.
eukaryotic.
When I was a kid, they didn't have domain. They had 5 different kingdoms of life. And when my dad was a kid, they only had 2 kingdoms back then. Everything was a plant or an animal. But after studying it more and more, you realize that it's not just plants and animals. There are also little microscopic protists down there. And there are fungi, which are kind of different from all of it. Fungi used to be classified as plants. And now they get their own kingdom because they're different enough from plants and animals. They get their own kingdom. And bacteria and archaea used to be together in a single kingdom called Monera. But they found out since then that they should actually have their own domains. Bacteria get their own domains, and archaea get their own domain, and eukarya get their own domain. So there are 3 domains now. And so let's just look at these 2 organisms. Here's a mouse. Musculus, that's a house mouse.
Ice mice.
And Rana cadesbiana, I don't know if I pronounced it right, is a North American bullfrog. And so let's see how the classification of these 2 things are different.
So that's the genus.
Well, they're both in domain eukarya. Let's start at domain and work our way down.
So it's eukarya, archaea, and bacteria.
Yes, those are the 3 domains: eukarya, archaea, and bacteria. Now, the reason why these animals are in eukarya is because they have eukaryotic cells.
Has a nucleus.
Do you remember this stuff, Savannah? You look like you're taking a little break. The eukaryotic cell, do you remember the properties of eukaryotic cells?
Has a nucleus.
Has a nucleus. What else?
Multicellular.
Has membranous organelles inside of it. Not necessarily multicellular.
No.
There are some unicellular eukaryotes,
Yeah, it has
like amoebas.
Oh yeah.
Mitochondria, but not
Has
chloroplasts.
mitochondrions in it.
No chloroplasts.
It has eukaryotes can have chloroplasts. It's got those big cells that have all the different organelles we studied. The eukaryotes. So both of these are like that. So they are somewhat related to one another because they both have eukaryotic cells, which is different from like a bacteria, which has prokaryotic cells. So they're in a different domain than bacteria. Now they're animals. They're kingdom Animalia. These 2 things are both animals because they run around and they eat stuff and they react to things. That's what animals do. A plant would be in a different kingdom. A plant would be in a separate box from this one. And these 2 things are very different from plants. Plants do photosynthesis and plants have chloroplasts. And these 2 things do not. So we consider them both to be animals.
So all amphibians are related.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So there's no.
All amphibians would be in kingdom Animalia.
But there's no just like 2 coexisting amphibians that just happen to be able to live in both environments. Are they all related?
All amphibians are related. They're in the same, what we call, class.
Okay.
I haven't got to class yet. So, both of these things are animals. Now, both of these things are in phylum Chordata.
Huh.
Now, phylum Chordata is a phylum that has a spinal cord going down your back. Everything in phylum Chordata has a spinal cord going down your back. Jonathan, both the mouse and the bullfrog have a spinal cord going down their back. So they're both in phylum Chordata. There are a lot of animals, though, that are not in phylum Chordata. Can you think of one?
Jellyfish.
A jellyfish. Doesn't have a spinal cord going down its back.
Wait,
Snake does have a spinal cord.
Yeah, really big.
A worm. An earthworm doesn't have a spinal cord going down its back.
Starfish.
A starfish does not.
Sponge.
A sponge does not. A slug does not. These are good. Y'all are good.
Squid.
A squid does not.
An ant.
An ant does not. So all of those would be in some different phylum. And we're going to study those phylums later. But these 2 do have a spinal cord going down their back, so they're phylum Chordata. Now the next thing after phylum is class. We actually find that these 2 organisms are in different classes. One is in class amphibian. The amphibians all are born in the water and swim around as tadpoles, and then they metamorphose to a type of organism that has lungs and loses its fins and then walks around on land. All the amphibians do that. And the frog is one of them. It's an amphibian.
Ovid.
The mammals are different. They're all born on land, or they're all born, not necessarily on land, but they're all born, they have hair, they have mammary glands, they're warm-blooded, and so mammals are different than amphibians. And so they get in 2 different classes here. Now, the mouse is order Rodentia, which rodents are, they're small, most of them are nocturnal, They have a specific diet of stuff that they eat. The order here with the frogs are in are called order Anura. Anurans are amphibians that don't have tails as adults. There are amphibians that do have tails, like salamanders. But the frog does not have a tail as an adult, so it's Anura. And then family Muridae, that's a certain species of that are mouse-like organisms, and I'm not exactly sure what it takes to be a family Muridae. I haven't studied that. And the frogs are family Ranidae, but there's something about Muridae and Ranidae that makes them unique. Maybe the book talks about it. You can read about it. And finally, you get down to genus and species. So the idea here is you don't have to memorize what the frog and the mouse are. What you have to understand is that each level of classification has groups underneath it. You see? And you get more and more specific as you go down the list. You know how to classify humans? That's something interesting. We should probably do.
Oh.
Let's start a domain. What domain do you think we're in?
Eukarya.
We're eukaryotes. Yes. Why are we eukaryotes?
We have a nucleus.
We have eukaryotic cells. What kingdom are we in?
Animalia.
We're animals. And again, these are Latin names, Latin words. That's why it's animalia and not animal. Animal is an English word. Animalia is the Latin term. What phylum?
Chordata.
Chordata. That means we got a spinal cord going down our back, like a lot of other creatures. What class are we in?
Mammalia.
Mammalia. That means we have hair. There are a lot of chordates without hair. There's fish. There's amphibians. There's reptiles. There's birds. None of them have hair, but we are mammals because we have hair. What order are we in? Do you know that?
Primates.
Yeah, we're primates.
Nailed it.
Primates have opposable thumbs. There's a lot of mammals that don't have opposable thumbs. There's dogs and cats and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Is there a Latin name for that?
What's that?
There's 4.
There's actually 4 kingdoms in domain eukarya. But there's also other kingdoms in domain archaea, and there's other kingdoms in domain bacteria. So I'm not sure how many total kingdoms there are.
Are cyanobacteria, are they their own kingdom?
Cyanobacteria are bacteria.
But are they their own kingdom in bacteria?
No, they're their own phylum in the kingdom. They might be their own kingdom in bacteria. You're right. In domain bacteria, they're probably in a kingdom. Yeah, that's correct. Good thinking.
Does primates have a Latin name?
I think the primates is Latin.
Primates? Oh.
Yeah. I think that is Latin. I'm not sure.
I'm a Latin scholar.
What family are we in? Do you know? Of the primates,
Apes.
we're in the upright walking family.
Rectus.
Homo sapien.
Hominid.
I meant
Hominidae. That means upright walking.
Homo sapien.
And then there's
There are other extinct forms of upright walkers that are gone now. We outlasted them all.
Yay, us.
We'll talk about that at the end of the year. We go into the evolution of hominids, which is very interesting. And then the genus, like we said, is Homo, which is a particularly smart group of hominids. And the specific epithet is sapiens, which is the smartest of the smart. The specific epithet, by the way, is always written lowercase. The genus is uppercase. And why that is, I'm not exactly sure, but that was the way Linnaeus did it. So we still do it like that today. Isn't that interesting? classification scheme works is reflects the evolutionary tree. In other words, there's 3 domains. And they show them here on page 351. There are 3 main branches, you see. 3 main branches of the evolutionary tree. There was some last universal common ancestor. It's called Luca. My voice is changing. It's called Luca. And this universal common ancestor evolved into bacteria on one branch, and then archaea on another branch, and later eukarya on another branch. What do you think the least universal common ancestor had? What do you think it was like?
Us.
Everything.
One like us.
It was like everything.
Really simple. Small.
It was probably very simple, small. That's good. This was an essay question about 4 years ago that I think averaged like 2. It said right about what the universal common ancestor would be like. The one organism that everything came from. And well, you actually got a point if you said it was small. Yeah, it wouldn't be big. It's probably a single cell, don't you think? Because bacteria and archaea, the first branches of this tree, are single-celled creatures.
And then it changed.
What else was it probably like?
It changed because of its environment.
Yeah, it did change, but what was it like before it changed?
Probably
Glycolysis.
Probably did glycolysis. You would have gotten a point for that. It made its energy through glycolysis, which means tearing apart sugars, not using oxygen because there wasn't any oxygen around back then, just tearing them in half and kind of getting a couple ATPs out of it. Yeah, you get a point for that.
I mean,
Yeah.
very simple.
Simple creatures. Did they have any kind of covering to them, or what was?
Yeah, had
cell membrane.
Had a membrane. Probably had a membrane because every cell that exists from all of these have membranes. That's right. It probably had a membrane.
Another point.
And it probably had some sort of cell wall too, because archaea and bacteria both have cell walls. So anyway, you can say that. Talk about it didn't use oxygen. You got points for that because there was no oxygen around until cyanobacteria evolved, and they started to make
It's like
oxygen.
the thing in the pond, the Ornis family.
Yes, the organism that evolved in the organic soup. Remember that? The primordial soup. All the molecules, when they're bashing together, made larger and larger structures, till eventually you got the first cell, which was probably the last universal common ancestor, which they talk about in your reading that you'll do. Luca. So anyway, you can see this branching. So there's a branch leading to the bacteria and more branching that goes on in the evolutionary tree here. And a branch leading to archaea and all these different groups of archaea. These would be the different kingdoms of archaea. And then there are phylums from those kingdoms. And see, these branches go a lot further. This branching out. This is what we call an evolutionary tree.
So bacteria, there are 2 different kingdoms?
There's actually several kingdoms of bacteria. It's showing 3 major groups here. Cyanobacteria here, and some different types of heterotrophic bacteria. You can see it's got kind of 3 branches there. But there's actually more than they're showing here. They can't show you the entire tree of life. That there's about 30 million branches in that tree. Because right now on the Earth there's about 30 million species. Probably going back to the start of time, probably there's been several hundred million species that exist on Earth. Most of them are extinct now. So the tree of life is a huge branching thing that scientists are trying to piece together. And it'll surely take hundreds of years before we know all the branches to the tree. We'll probably never know all the branches to the tree because you can't go back in time. And probably some things that existed never were fossilized. So we won't ever know that they existed. But you can see, let's just look at this eukarya branch. This eukarya branch, the eukaryotes evolved into 4 different kingdoms. The protists came first. Kingdom Protista are single-celled or multicellular simple organisms like amoebas and paramecia and algae. Here's some of the algae that are over on this side. Some of them didn't do photosynthesis and some of them did. And then there's other branches that lead to animals, which we are a part of. There's a branch that leads to fungus, and there's a branch that leads to plants. So those are the different kingdoms: protists, plants, fungi, and animals. Now, our book spends more time talking about animals because we care more about animals because we're animals. But plants indeed have their own history and stories of evolution, and fungi do too. And the rest of the book is devoted to talking about each of these groups.
The rest?
Yeah, the rest of the book. We'll talk about the archaea and bacteria. I'll spend not very long on those, a day. I'll spend only about 5 or 6 days talking about plants. We don't talk about them too much. Not in this introductory course. If you want to learn about plants further, you take a botany course in college. We'll talk about fungi for no more than a day. And then we start talking about animals, and we'll spend a lot more time on them, a few weeks. And then we'll get into ecology and the study of how all of these things live together, which is what this class focuses more on. We'll spend several weeks on ecology. And by the time we're done with all that, we're done. So this is kind of leads to the rest of this class. That's kind of an introductory to the rest of this class. So you need to understand this picture. Let's see a little video footage on this.
Living organisms are divided into 3 major groups: the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya. The establishment and organization of these groups, called domains, is based on comparisons of nucleotide sequences of ribosomal RNA. Bacteria and archaea are similar in cell structure and are referred to as prokaryotes. These 2 groups can be distinguished by a number of important characteristics. All higher organisms, protista, plants, fungi, and animals share a common cell structure and are referred to as eukaryotes. Eukaryotic cells contain a nuclear membrane, endoplasmic reticulum, and organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplasts, whereas prokaryotic cells do not. In bacteria and archaea, protein synthesis occurs on 70S ribosomes, made up of 30S and 50S subunits, whereas in eukaryotic cells, translation occurs on 80S ribosomes, made up of 40S and 60S subunits.
Okay, so what they're telling you here is all the ribosomes. Do you remember what ribosomes are?
They put together the proteins.
They make proteins.
Nailed it.
Remember proteins? Remember these? I love this thing. I've shown it to you 1,000 times. Proteins are made at the ribosome. And the bacteria and the archaea have different types of ribosomes than do the eukarya. 50S and 30S is talking about the RNA that's folded up to make the ribosomes. And it's fundamentally different. So this is one of the major groups of evidence for the reason why they separated eukaryotes and prokaryotes. They have different ribosomes, which is a fundamental difference.
S values are based on the size, shape, and weight of a particle, which accounts for why the sum of subunits of the ribosome does not equal the S value of the intact ribosome. Histone proteins associated with the DNA of eukaryotic cells are generally lacking in bacteria, but present in archaea. Archaea histones are similar in structure to eukaryotic histones. Small amounts of protein are associated with maintaining the organization of bacterial DNA. Most bacteria and archaea have a cell wall.
Okay, hold on. Let's go back and talk about this a little bit. Y'all know what DNA is, right?
Deoxyribonucleic.
This long molecule. Jordan, are you with me? DNA is this long molecule. In our cells, the DNA is wrapped around special proteins called histone proteins. And the DNA wraps around these histone proteins. So you got this histone protein and this long DNA strand, and the DNA wraps around it a couple of times, and then it'll go for a while, and then it'll wrap around a histone protein again. And these histone proteins have the ability to kind of move, pull themselves together to form a chromosome. Do you remember when the DNA coiled up to form chromosomes? Remember when we talked about that?
Oh, yeah.
So all eukaryotes have that ability to coil up their DNA using these histone proteins. Prokaryotes pretty much usually don't have any histone proteins. It's just DNA laying there. It's not wrapped around proteins. But we find that the archaea, the prokaryotes, the domain of archaeans, they have some histone in their structure. And the bacteria don't have any. So we think that we are more closely related to the archaea than we are to the bacteria.
No way.
Because archaea start to have histones, have some histones, but bacteria don't have any. So we must be more closely related to the archaea.
Containing the organization of bacterial DNA. Most bacteria and archaea have a cell wall. The bacterial cell wall contains peptidoglycan as well as proteins, polysaccharides, and lipids. The archaeal cell wall contains no peptidoglycan, but does contain proteins, polysaccharides, and lipids. Cell walls are also present in eukaryotes such as plants, algae, and fungi, but are lacking in animal cells and protozoa. Plant cell walls contain cellulose and lignins, whereas fungal cell walls contain chitin. The cell membranes of bacteria and eukarya contain phospholipids consisting of esters of glycerol, whereas the cell membranes of all archaea contain ethers of glycerol.
So they're showing you the fundamental differences between archaea and bacteria here. Bacteria have different phospholipids. Can you tell that this is a phospholipid, by the way?
See the tail and head?
Remember what makes up the membrane? Those phospholipids in the membrane that were organized like this, and they form the bilayer. Y'all remember phospholipids? These are it's showing the phospholipids, only it's got the tails kind of sticking out to the right. And the phospholipids in archaea are fundamentally different from the phospholipids in bacteria. And so they decided to put bacteria and archaea in different groups. The cell wall in archaea is different from the cell wall in bacteria. It's kind of made of different stuff. Bacteria have this stuff called peptidoglycan, and archaea don't. Again, that's another good reason to put bacteria and archaea in different domains, in different groups. They seem to be fundamentally different organisms based on their structures. Different cell walls, different cell membranes, different ribosomes. Let's put them in two different domains. It was a good enough of an argument that that's what they did. There's a cool extra reading section on the top of page 352 you may be interested in. Couple of girls, there they are, probably about your age. They figured out how to do DNA analysis. And DNA, as you know, is kind of like a barcode. You know, if you buy a can of soup, it's got a UPC label, and you just swipe that across the laser, and it'll read what it is. So by the lines there, you can tell, the machine can tell that, oh, anything with that set of lines is some kind of soup, and it knows how much, the computer knows how much to charge. Well, DNA kind of works the same way. Anything with this set of DNA is a bumblebee. Anything with a different set of DNA is not a bumblebee, it's something else. So there's a way that you can take DNA from any organism, like you or me. You can take DNA from my hair. Cells in my hair have DNA in them. You can take that DNA and you can kind of set it up and look at the barcode. And it's a pretty simple kind of experiment. Anyway, just real quick, these girls did this, and they found that the fish sold in fine restaurants was not actually the fish that they were claiming it to be. It was much cheaper fish. And they busted all these restaurants in New York City with their little science fair project. And it got really famous, and it was just a high school science fair project. Is that interesting?
Are we still doing that?
Science fair project? If you come to me with a topic, you can't.